Follow this story until the very end, and while you're reading, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to know who's out there with me tonight. Because I have to tell you something. I almost didn't share this. I sat with it for weeks, turning it over in my mind the way you turn a smooth stone in your palm, wondering if telling it would make it more real or less painful. But then I thought, no, someone out there needs to hear this. Maybe that someone is you. So let me start from the beginning, because the beginning matters more than you'd think. My name is Sandra. I'm 64 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom house in Asheville, North Carolina, with a back porch that looks out over the mountains, a garden I've been cultivating for 11 years, and a cat named Biscuit who has strong opinions about everything. I was married for 31 years to a man named Howard, who passed away from a heart attack 6 years ago. He was a contractor, built things with his hands his whole life. Didn't leave me rich, but he left me comfortable, and more importantly, he left me with values. Pay your debts. Say what you mean, don't let people walk on you. I spent 30 years as a hospital administrator. I understand budgets, I understand people. I understand what it looks like when someone is taking advantage of a situation, and I understand, maybe better than I'd like to, what it looks like when the person being taken advantage of can't see it because she loves someone too much. That person was me. My son is 38 years old. His name is Patrick. He's tall like his father was, has his father's laugh, and for a long time I thought he had his father's integrity too. He works in sales, or he says he does. The work is sporadic. Some months he does well, other months he doesn't. His wife, my daughter-in-law, her name is Renata. Wait, no. I have to be careful with that. Her name is Christy. She's never worked. Not in the 7 years they've been married. She has a degree in communications from a state school they asked me to help pay for. I did, and she has never used it. Not once. They have 2 children, my grandchildren, a boy 8 years old and a girl who just turned 5. I love those children with everything I have. That matters to this story. Remember that. When Howard died, I received his life insurance. I also sold the house we'd lived in together because I couldn't bear to stay there alone, and I bought my little place in Asheville. After all of that, I had a comfortable amount set aside. Not extravagant, but enough that I didn't have to worry, and enough that when my son came to me 2 years after his father's death and said they were struggling, I said yes. I want to be honest with you about what yes looked like over the years. It started with the down payment on their house, $60,000. Patrick said they'd pay me back. I told him not to worry about it. It was a gift. Christy didn't say thank you. She said, we were hoping for a little more actually, given the neighborhood we're looking at. I remember standing in their kitchen. I'd driven 4 hours to help them move in, and feeling something cold settle in my stomach. But I told myself she was stressed. Moving is stressful. People say things. I kept saying that to myself for years. People say things. After the house, there were the car payments. Patrick's truck needed replacing. Then Christy's SUV. Then the kitchen renovation because Christy had found this open concept design she loved and the current layout was impossible to live with. Then private school tuition for my grandson because the public school in their district was and Christy's word here, not mine, not somewhere we'd send our children. I want to be precise because I've had a lot of time to add things up. Over 5 years, I gave them approximately $780,000. Direct transfers, paid invoices, tuition checks, the down payment, a vacation to Costa Rica because Christy said they desperately needed a reset as a family, new appliances, and more small things I can't even fully remember. Birthday gifts. Christmas. A hot tub for their backyard that I bought because Patrick mentioned offhand that Christy had always wanted one. $780,000. Patrick worked sporadically during this time. He had a good year once. I think he cleared about $90,000. Most years it was less. Christy did not work. Here is the part I am ashamed of. I knew, somewhere beneath all the love and the wanting to help, that something was wrong. I knew it the way you know something's wrong with your body before the doctor tells you. That quiet, persistent discomfort you keep explaining away. I wasn't naive. I was a hospital administrator for 30 years. I've managed difficult people my entire career. But when it's your child, the rules you apply to everyone else somehow don't apply. You make exceptions. You tell yourself it's temporary. You tell yourself the money doesn't matter. That family is what matters, and you believe it because believing it is easier than what believing the alternative would require you to do. What I didn't account for was Christy. She is a particular kind of person. Quiet about it mostly. She doesn't yell. She doesn't make scenes. What she does is this. She establishes what she considers to be her rights, and then she defends them with a cold, patient certainty that I have never encountered in another human being. She decided early on that Patrick's family money, my money, Howard's money, the result of our entire working lives, was part of the financial picture of their marriage. Not a gift, not something given freely from love, a resource. And she managed that resource accordingly. I noticed it in small ways first. When I visited, she was always pleasant but never warm. She never asked about my life, my health, my friends. Conversations stayed on the surface. When I tried to go deeper, when I mentioned that I'd been feeling lonely since Howard died, that some days the house felt very quiet, she would nod and say something like, "That must be hard," and then redirect to something about the children's schedules or a home improvement project. She was never unkind enough that I could point to it directly. She was just absent. There, but not there. With my grandchildren, she was different. Attentive, engaged. She ran their lives like a project manager. Activities, tutoring, playdates, and she was good at it. I'll give her that. But when I was with the children, there was always a subtle management of the interaction. I was allowed to be Grandma Sandra within certain parameters. I could play with them, read to them, bring them things. I could not, however, have a conversation with them that Christy wasn't monitoring. I once told my grandson a story about his grandfather, about a camping trip Howard and Patrick had taken when Patrick was small, and Christy came into the room within 2 minutes and said brightly, "Okay, time to wash up for dinner." It was 3 p.m. I kept saying that to myself. People say things. People do things. She's just protective. She's just particular. Patrick, in the middle of all this, was passive. That's the word I keep coming back to. He loves his wife. He loves his children. He loves his life. The life I was subsidizing. The open concept kitchen and the private school and the Costa Rica vacation. He wanted all of it to continue. And the way to make all of it continue was to not rock the boat. So he didn't. When I mentioned something that felt off, he'd say, "You know how Christy is, or she doesn't mean anything by it." When I called and he was with her, he was brief. When I called and she wasn't around, he was my Patrick again. Funny, warm, talking about his dad, asking how the garden was coming. I told myself that was enough, that the real Patrick was still there. My 63rd birthday was in April. I had told them in February that it was coming up. Not hinting. I genuinely mentioned it because I was thinking of planning a small trip and wondered if they might want to join. Patrick said it sounded great. Christy said she'd have to check the calendar. I sent a reminder in March. Patrick said they'd figure something out. I sent a text the week before asking what the plan was. Patrick said he'd get back to me. He didn't. My birthday was a Tuesday. I woke up alone. I made myself coffee and sat on my back porch and looked at the mountains, and I waited. Not doing anything dramatic about it, just waited, the way you wait for something you're not sure is coming. The grandchildren would call, I thought. Surely the grandchildren would call, I thought. Surely the grandchildren would call. I'd been their grandmother for 8 years. My grandson knows my birthday. I told him myself. No one called. By 3 p.m, I had received exactly 2 messages. One from my friend Rosemary, who I've known since we were in our 30s. One from my cousin in Phoenix. That was it. I sat with it for about an hour. I am not a person who normally asks for things. Howard used to say that was my flaw, that I'd rather go without than ask. But I was 63 years old, sitting alone on my birthday, and I thought, it's okay to say something. It's okay to let them know how you feel. So I sent a message to the family group chat. Patrick, Christy, and the kids were on it. I wrote something simple. I said I was a little sad that no one had called, that birthdays felt harder since losing Howard, and that I missed them and hoped they were thinking of me. I put my phone down and went to water my garden. When I came back in 40 minutes later, there was one response. It was from Patrick. Mom, Christy and I have been talking, and we think we all need some space right now. Things have been feeling really pressured from our end. Please don't reach out for a while. We'll contact you when we're ready. I read it 3 times. I set the phone on the kitchen table, and I walked to the window, and I looked out at the mountains, and I breathed in and out. In and out. The way you breathe when you're trying to stay inside your own body. Then I picked up the phone and looked again, because I thought maybe I'd misread it. Maybe I'd missed something, some context, some softening I'd overlooked. I hadn't, and there was one more thing. Christy had liked the message. Not sent one, not written anything, just liked it, with the little heart icon, as if to say, yes, we are in agreement. This has been decided. On my birthday, after $780,000. I set the phone down again. I fed Biscuit. I washed my coffee cup. And then I sat at my kitchen table for a very long time, doing nothing except understanding, finally and completely, what I had been refusing to understand for years. This wasn't a family dynamic. It wasn't stress or misunderstanding or Christy being particular. This was a transaction. I had been a resource. And now that communicating with me required emotional effort, required them to acknowledge that I was a human being with feelings and a birthday and grief, I had become an inconvenience. The message wasn't really about space. It was about the fact that I'd made them feel something, and they decided they didn't want to feel it. I am a 63-year-old woman. I am a hospital administrator. I have managed crises in those terms. People's lives, institutional budgets, situations where the cost of doing the wrong thing was measured in human suffering. I spent that evening making a few calls. The first was to my financial advisor, a woman I've worked with for 14 years. I told her I wanted to make some changes. I explained that I would be closing the account that Patrick had access to, the one I used to transfer money to him, and that I wanted to review my will and my estate plan. She asked if everything was okay. I said it would be. The second call was to my estate attorney. I left a message asking for an appointment. Then I blocked Patrick's number. I blocked Christy's number. I blocked the email address they used. And I went to bed at 9:30, and I slept. I want you to understand this clearly. I slept better than I had in 2 years. The next morning, I had a missed call from a number I didn't recognize. Then another. Then 3 more. By noon, I had 14 missed calls from numbers I didn't know. By that evening, it was 31. Then I got a call from my cousin, who said Patrick had called her asking if she'd heard from me, sounding panicked. I found out later, through my cousin, who'd spoken to Patrick, that when he tried to transfer some money the following week to cover their mortgage shortfall, the account was closed. The automatic transfers I'd had set up, tuition, car payment, the monthly stipend I'd been sending without ever really naming it as a stipend, all of it was gone, and they didn't understand what had happened because they had never really believed I would do anything about it. I was the reliable fixture, the resource that renewed itself every month. It took them 9 days to show up at my house. I was in the garden when I heard the car in the driveway. I knew before I even stood up. I walked around to the front, and there they were, Patrick, Christy, and both children, standing on my porch. Patrick looked like he hadn't slept. Christy looked composed, but her jaw was tight. My grandson was looking at his shoes. My granddaughter was holding a small bunch of gas station flowers. I stood at the bottom of my porch steps, and I looked at my son. He said, "Mom, please, we need to talk." I said, "I got your message." There was a long silence. Christy started to say something about how the message had been misunderstood, that they hadn't meant it the way it sounded, that they'd been overwhelmed and said things poorly. I let her finish, and then I said, "Christy, I've been thinking about what you meant for a long time. I don't think it was misunderstood. I think it was clear." Patrick said, "Mom, come on, don't do this. We have kids, we have a mortgage." And something happened in me then. Not cruelty, I want to be clear about that. Not satisfaction, exactly. Something quieter. Something that felt like finally being done carrying a weight I'd picked up so long ago. I'd stopped noticing it was there. I said, Patrick, I love you. I love those children more than I can tell you. But I will not continue to fund a life in which I am treated like an ATM. I have an appointment with my attorney next week, and I am restructuring everything. Not to punish you, to protect myself, and to give you the space you asked for. Christy's composure cracked then. Not dramatically, just at the edges. She said, You're really going to do this over a text message? I said no. I'm doing this because of $780,000 and a birthday and a heart emoji. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then my granddaughter held out the flowers and said, Happy birthday, Grandma. We're sorry we forgot. I took the flowers, I crouched down and hugged her, and I hugged my grandson, and I told them both that I loved them and that nothing between the grown-ups had anything to do with them. Then I stood up and I looked at my son and I said, Call me when you're ready to have a real conversation. I'll be here. And I went inside. That was 7 months ago. Patrick called me 3 weeks later without Christy. We talked for 2 hours. It was the most honest conversation we'd had since Howard died, maybe longer. He cried. I cried. He said things I'd needed to hear him say for years. That he'd known something was wrong. That he'd been a coward about it. That he'd let the comfort of the situation make him passive in ways he wasn't proud of. He said Christy was angry. He said he didn't know what was going to happen with their marriage. He said he was scared. I told him I was there, that I had always been there, that the money was never the point. The point was that I needed to matter as a person, not as a line item. We are rebuilding, slowly. I see the grandchildren now. I've been twice to pick them up for the day, just me and them, to the Children's Museum in Asheville, and once to the pumpkin patch up on the ridge. Christy was civil when I returned them. Not warm, civil. I have not resumed the financial support. My attorney helped me set up a structure, a trust, administered by a third party, designated for the grandchildren's education when the time comes. It will be there for them, but it will not pass through Patrick and Christy's household budget. My estate attorney also drew up a new will. Patrick is still in it because he is my son and I love him, but the terms are different now. There are conditions. My attorney was very clear and I was very deliberate. I'm telling you this, sitting on my back porch in Asheville. Biscuit is in my lap. The mountains are doing what they do at this time of year. That blue-gray color in the early evening that Howard used to say looked like something painted. The garden is put to bed for winter. I don't regret a single dollar I gave them during the years when I gave them freely, and they received it with at least a pretense of gratitude. Those years happened. Patrick was present in those years. My grandchildren grew in those years. But I will not apologize for what I did when I finally drew a line. I will not apologize for protecting myself. And I want to tell you, whoever you are, wherever you're watching from tonight, that it is never too late. Not at 63, not at 70, not at any age. You are allowed to be a person. You are allowed to say, I matter here. This is not a transaction. I have a birthday and a heart and a grief that is still with me, and I deserve to be seen. Howard used to say, pay your debts, say what you mean, don't let people walk on you. I finally listened. If any part of this story felt familiar to you, if you saw yourself in it somewhere, please leave me a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me your story if you want to. This channel is called Emily's Family Stories. And the reason I'm here is because I believe that ordinary lives contain extraordinary things, and that we heal better together than alone. Thank you for being here with me tonight. I've been thinking about something Howard used to do when he was building things. Before he'd frame a wall or pour a foundation, he'd spend a long time just looking at the ground, not doing anything, just looking. I asked him once what he was looking for. He said, I'm looking for what's already there that I have to work around. You can't build something solid if you don't know what's underneath. I think about that a lot now. About what I was building with Patrick and Christy, and what was underneath it that I kept refusing to look at. Here's what I know to be true. The way things end is almost always contained in the way they began. Christy's first words to me when I handed them $60,000 for a down payment were not thank you. They were that she'd hoped for more. I filed that away. I told myself it didn't mean anything, but it meant everything. It told me exactly what the foundation looked like, and I chose to build on it anyway. For 7 years, until the weight of what I'd built came down. That's not a tragedy. That's cause and effect. You cannot give someone the message, year after year, that their comfort matters more than your dignity, and then be surprised when they treat your birthday like an inconvenience. I taught them who I was willing to be. I taught them what I would accept, and they learned the lesson perfectly. The hardest thing I've had to sit with isn't the money. $780,000 is a significant number, and there are moments when I feel something sharp when I think about it. But what sits heavier is the time, the years of making myself smaller, of explaining away Christy's coldness, of being grateful for whatever version of Patrick she allowed me to have. I was a woman who had spent 30 years making difficult decisions in a hospital, life and death decisions, budget decisions, personnel decisions, and I could not make the one decision that was right in front of me because I was afraid of what it would cost. That's the thing about fear that I wish someone had told me earlier. The cost of acting is almost always less than the cost of not acting. The thing you're afraid to lose has usually already been lost by the time you're afraid. Patrick and I are still finding our way back to each other. It's slow. It's real. He's a man in his late 30s realizing that the ease he lived in had a price he never personally paid. And that reckoning is hard to watch in your own child. But I'd rather watch him reckon with it now honestly than watch him continue not to for another decade. Christy is civil. I don't expect more than that, and I've stopped wanting it. Some bridges were built wrong from the start. What I carry now, what I want to leave you with tonight, is this: integrity is not something you perform for other people. It's the quiet, private act of being honest about what you see, even when what you see is uncomfortable, and then living in accordance with what you know. I failed at that for years. I saw the foundation, and I built anyway. And when it came down, I had to be the one to decide who I was in the rubble. I decided I was Sandra, 63 years old, a woman with a garden and a cat and a back porch in Asheville, and a life that still has time in it. A woman who finally listened to what Howard had been telling her all along. Don't let people walk on you. It took me longer than it should have. But I got there.